All right, in chapter 2, we're dealing with one of the basic bread and butter issues of anthropology, which is culture. What is culture? Well, as we've talked about in previous lectures, and we're going to look at more and more and more throughout this course, culture is not really just one thing. It's the whole. It's the collective whole of humans and their behavior, and it's everything about them. It's the as Edward Tyler defines, that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, arts, morals, law, customs, and any other capabilities and habits acquired as a member of society. And you don't just invent it, but you're a participant in it and you contribute to culture. You are enculturated from an infant, and actually probably even before you were born, as when you were hearing things from when you were before you were born. You were probably perceiving things from your culture, learning sounds, learning sights, learning smells, and getting nutrition and building your body. All of these things are cultural. It's the sort of the object of what anthropologists study. Culture for humans is learned, and it's slightly different to we see in biology that there's social aspects of other groups of animals. Ants have a social structure to them. Birds and fish and herding animals, packs of wolves have social relations with one another. Animals live in groups or not. Sometimes they're solitary creatures, and that affects their behavior and their patterns of survival. Humans live in groups, and we, as I mentioned before, we've always been social. But culture, as meant in anthropology, is something that is acquired through interaction with other humans. In other words, cultural learning is the way that we acquire and participate in the cultural process. And that's unique to humans. Cultural learning is accumulated knowledge about experiences and information that can be perceived directly, but also indirectly perceived and transmitted through things like symbols. Now, you may think of art as being sort of high-end of culture, high culture, and it can be. But it's also the kind of the mechanical tools that we use for transmitting and creating culture, and the process of doing that. A very famous anthropologist, Clifford Geertz, defined culture as ideas based on cultural learning and symbols. He prioritized symbolism as something that we use. Now, and other animals don't use symbolism in the same way that we do. At least they don't. Even the primates that we've been able to teach certain symbols, they use it for one-to-one representations of things in the real world. How they can get food and get certain treatment, but they don't create language or symbols like we do. Our ability to create symbols allows us to create a virtual world around us, a cultural framework into which we participate and work. And that helps us to survive. We build houses. No other creature does that sort of complex structure of tool use, and we wear clothing in cold weather because we're able to figure this stuff out for our survival and our adaptation. Now, as we're going to see, symbols and abstract thought, it doesn't always suit us. It doesn't always mean that we're going to be successful. For instance, things like monks exist in the world, right? Monks who take a vow of chastity, celibacy, they don't reproduce. That's not very evolutionary. That's not very successful for perpetuating the species. But the ideas get passed down from one group to the next, and so you have monks who don't reproduce, actually reproducing more monks through thought, through symbols. If everybody became a monk, humans would be gone in a generation, right? So if we all took a vow of celibacy, then we'd be done for. But so some cultural expressions aren't necessarily positive adaptations. They can be maladaptations. We can consume lots of fossil fuels and pump that all out into the atmosphere, and that can ruin our health. It can ruin our long-term survival on this planet, but we can still choose to do it. So human adaptations, or we have the capability to make decisions about how we can alter the world, how we can create cultures around ourselves. That can help our survival, but we also can make poor decisions as well. So the human ability to use symbols is a pretty basic concept of culture. In fact, a symbol is can be defined as something that's verbal or nonverbal within a particular language or culture that comes to stand for something else. Now, we're the only creatures on the planet that have this sort of abstract representation, that we're not just saying this is going to get us food, right? Or this will find us water. We're thinking about, what does this pattern do? Maybe I can close my eyes and imagine something that doesn't exist in the world, but I can invent it and create it. I can make a tool that I can't break a bone to get into the marrow to eat that really nutrient-rich bone marrow, but I can pick up a stone and I can smash it, or I can make a knife and I can cut it, or I can take the hide of an animal and scrape it, and I can make a cloth for myself, or I can build a structure and I can keep the elements out and keep myself protected from the cold and the wind and the rain. I can build a spaceship and I can go to the moon, right? So this is on every scale, from a basic level all the way up to literally the space age and the computer age. But cultures exist as shared qualities. You have to be able to understand the cultural symbols that are being used, and other people have to understand you. So this is it's a participation, it's a back and forth between groups. And so different cultures may not be able to share those symbols amongst themselves. There would have to be some sort of a communication where they'd have to integrate those understandings. And so, but by doing this social transmission, by transmitting symbols and understanding cultural contexts, you're actually creating a common experience that you share, and that creates a cultural group that keeps itself together through bonds of shared experience. And this shapes values, memories, expectations, and is really sort of the glue that holds a cultural group together. Nature is always there, though, right? So we have a physical body, we have a physical environment that we live in, and this shapes our culture. But at the same time, the way we respond to it can actually shape our own nature as well. So, for instance, I have pretty bad eyesight. That's my biological nature. But culture actually allows me to correct my vision, and I actually have perfect vision with my glasses on, right? So the culture can actually shape nature as much as nature can shape culture. And that's also a constantly moving process, that your participation in culture is shared with other people's experiences, but it's also shared within the natural world. Culture is also all-encompassing. It's not just, culture isn't just a high culture. It isn't just cultures only for these group of people. Everybody has culture. Everyone is cultured, not just wealthy or privileged individuals, not just certain individuals, although certain groups can wall themselves off from others. And this is where you can have nested identities, nested cultures, where there's a subculture here and another culture here, and that all exists within a larger cultural group, within an even larger cultural group, and so on and so forth. Like Matryoshka dolls, that they're nested within one another, getting smaller and smaller, right down to the individual you and your participation in these various groups. But culture is also integrated. You can't really take one aspect of culture and take it apart and understand it on its own. Although we're going to try to do that a little bit in the second half of this course, because we're going to look at specific aspects of culture like economy and politics and gender and family and kinship and marriage and art. All of these things are individual aspects that weave together to create an integrated tapestry. It helps to be able to pull out one thread, look at it, analyze it, but it can't really be understood unless you weave it back in to create that overarching tapestry that makes sense as a cloth, as a fabric of society, as a fabric of culture. So culture is really the bread and butter of what we want to look at. It fulfills our needs. It fulfills our basic biological needs for food, drink, shelter, comfort, reproduction. But the way that we do it is channeled through this cooperative motion. I have an idea of the way culture exists. I express that. You get it into your brain. You express it. I perceive it. And then my ideas about culture change. And then I express it. And it's a constantly moving process. We have a biological basis for some of these things and an evolutionary basis. We're going to have some chapters in the future when we look into the archaeological and paleontological record. But human capacity for culture has been around for at least 2 to 3 million years. And we can use living primates that are our closest relatives that to compare our cultural adaptations to these other chimps and gorillas and things like that, to see how, as an idea of how our ancestors may have operated in more environments that would have been similar to the way that our ancestors would have lived. This gives us some idea about some of the basic reasons for why we have some of these physical features. Why do we have grasping hands? Why do we have big brains? Why do we have forward-facing eyes? These are all things that, looking at present primates, will help us to understand the biological record of our evolutionary history, to understand where we came from and why that is. And that's important because that gives us an understanding of the development, not just of our biology, but of our sociality, the way our cultural groups started to come together and help us to survive in the past as well. Take a short break here and we'll come back in a moment.